Okay, hi everyone, this is SmithyQ, SmithyQ.com, and it's time for Longplay game number 10. Spoiler alert, this one's very anticlimactic. My opponent blunders on move 11, he loses a piece, and then he resigns 3 moves later. So it's not an all-time great game. And I don't have time to play another one, but what I can do is use this time to really dig deep into the opening here. Because the opening is perhaps my favorite opening in chess, the Scotch Mieses variation. And it's basically, what I like about it so much is that it's unlike anything else in chess. Positions are unique. It's not like how many Sicilians kind of resemble each other, or many, the closed Roy Lopez sort of resemble. No, this is just, nothing is like it. So let's take a look. So the opening with my Scotch is e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, d4. So this is what makes it the Scotch game. Take, take. Very common and popular in amateur level is the bishop c4 variation, the Scotch gambit, in which there are a lot of really sneaky traps. Let's see if I remember any. I think it's bishop c5, c3, take. Because now all of a sudden, bishop takes, yes. And then we can take back the bishop here. If he takes here, we just have, look at this position. Then bishop's attacking this, he can't castle. Knight wants to jump in, we are going to castle. And black's in huge trouble here. But I play the much more solid knight takes d4. And in this position, black really has a choice. Well, there's 2 main moves, either knight f6, like was played in the game, or bishop c5. But there's also, as weird as it may look, bishop b4 check is a move. Knight takes d4 is somewhat playable. Even things like g6, queen h4, queen. In fact, there's a whole bunch of moves in here. In the game, my opponent played the absolute main line, knight f6. And the quote-unquote problem with this move is that it's counterattacking e4. And so white has a choice of either defending or counterattacking. The old line, the Scotch 4 knights, I've never really liked. Because, okay, the knight defends the pawn, bishop pins the knight, and it's really hard to defend this pawn. For example, if we play bishop d3, we lose a knight. That's not very good. Playing f3 is very, very ugly, and probably d5 really soon is going to come and hit us hard. That's not very good. And so we're pretty much forced to go take, and then defend the pawn this way with bishop d3. And then there's often something like d5 takes, castles, reach a position. Whoops, not that. Castles. And we reach this position in which it honestly feels to me like black is doing pretty darn good, because he's got a center pawn to white's none, so he's controlling more of the center. He can always play c6 to defend it. He's threatening potentially to ruin white's pawn structure at any moment, though more likely is black drops back with bishop d6, and that prepares, honestly, potential action over here on the king side. Everything is aiming over there. Now, it's the same thing is kind of true for white. You've got a whole bunch of attacking ideas. Even something like this is possible. But in practice, these games don't tend to be very attacking oriented. I mean, it can if one person makes a mistake, but usually it kind of dulls out. And we get all the exchanges and yawn. So instead of defending the pawn, is we take the knight, and then we push with e5. Immediately challenge knight, and we see this is the downside to black's counterattack, is that the knight is being chased. Now, if you were to simply move the knight, okay, if he retreats, that's obviously very bad for him. He has no pieces developed. If he plays knight d5 immediately, we're going to hit it back with c4. It's going to move to, say, to here. We're going to go bishop to d3. We're going to castle. The e5 pawn is restricting what he can do. We got really easy development, and this is just a super version of the variation we're going to look at later. White's doing very well here. And so the correct move, the most accurate move, is queen e7, pinning the pawn. And then the counter move is queen e2, unpinning the pawn and defending it. And so we can already see the unique nature of this opening is that in the first few moves, the best moves are to put the queens in front of the bishop, in front of the king. What's going on? And the fun doesn't stop there, because now after the knight moves, we hit it back with c4, and then we have bishop a6. So we can see the improvement compared to the old version. Let me just back up. If black plays knight d5 without moving the queen, we can play c4. The knight has to move. There's no pin, and then after the knight does move, we play bishop d3. And now, we can see if black was trying to counterattack the pawn, all right, we could always play queen e2, and the queen doesn't block the bishop. Or even better, we would just castle, because he can't take the pawn, because that's a pin. That's not very good. Let's be back up. So by playing queen e7 first, and then I play queen e2, d5, c4, bishop a6, now the bishop is pinning the pawn to the queen. And so we can't take it, and that lets the knight stay here on this strong square better. It also makes it harder for white to develop this bishop. Again, if the queen weren't here, we could play bishop d3 right away, and we're fine. The queen is there, so we have to either move the queen or play g3 and bishop g2. Those would be the options to develop that bishop. At the same time, things aren't so cozy for black. His queen is in front of his bishop. And so, again, it's not so easy to develop. It's going to either move the queen or to play g6, bishop g7. Again, that's going to take a bit more time. Black's pawn structure is also worse. Notice how white, so if we look at the pawn islands, so these four pawns, they're all together, right? They're connected. These three pawns are connected, so that's white has what we call two pawn islands. Black has three. He's got three here, three pawns there, and then this little isolated guy over there. As a general rule, the more pawn islands, the more weak they are, or the more potential weaknesses there are. You can imagine if this pawn were to get doubled, all of a sudden black would then have 4 pawn islands, which I believe is the maximum you could possibly get. Yeah, and that would be the weakest type of pawn structure. And this kind of shows the nature of this position going forward, is that the real danger for black is that he gets no real play, pieces get exchanged into an endgame, and then white can really press. Because these pawns are doubled, that makes it hard for him to push them or do anything. And this pawn is isolated and weak. And in many Scotch games, that's exactly how white wins. Is he doesn't do anything special. Black just sort of drifts into passivity, and then white wins this pawn, or white takes advantage of the weaknesses over here, and then the endgame is trivial. That's pretty nice. Of course, that's not the final story. Black has some active play. Let's take a look. I ended up playing knight d2, which is generally considered the main move in this position. Now, black has about 1,000 different ways you can play this position. Off the top of my head, there is the knight b4, knight d6. There is the immediate castle. There's g6, bishop g7. Potentially playing with d6. d6 too early is premature. So is f6. But there's so many ways to play. And this is what makes this opening so interesting in my eyes, is that one, it's just unique. You don't see this type of development this early in the game, this sort of pawn structure. And the plans, there are so many of them. And as a general, because the positions are so, again, unique, generally the person with more experience in these positions, he knows what's going on, does better and is able to take advantage and tends to win. Which is pretty nice, because if this is the opening that I play the most, I will probably have more experience in it, and I can probably outplay my opponent. After g6, which is, again, he wants to develop the bishop, and then he's going to castle. He can castle either direction. Is that we then play knight f3, which, again, is generally considered the best way of playing, I believe. I sure hope so, because that's what I've been doing for a long time. And the idea with knight f3, so we just back up, is that in this position, this pawn is both a strength and a weakness. And so what white wants to do is concentrate his forces on it, if possible. And so what has been determined to be best play or among best play is this idea of getting the knight to f3 immediately, because now the knight is reinforcing this pawn. We can see it after bishop g7. Again, black has two pieces attacking it. If I didn't have the knight in f3, I might be forced to play f4, right? If I were to play, g3 here, say, and then, g6, bishop d2, bishop g7, I might have to play f4. But this is quite weakening now to my king. We can see that this diagonal is wide open. The queen can get there immediately. Also dangerous is perhaps the immediate f6, opening things up, or black can castle either way. And my king side is weak, right? The pawns are so there. So by bringing the knight to f3 immediately, we help stop that. Bishop g7, and then bishop g5. Attacking the queen. And asking the queen where it wants to go. There are two moves here. My opponent plays neither of them, unfortunately. My opponent plays queen e6. The two moves, one would be f6, and one is queen b4. Queen b4 is the most popular. But in this, let's just make one move for black. Well, notice that what's happened in this position is that white has managed to trade queens. And so we're one step closer to the endgame, in which black has potential to suffer. In fact, if we look at one more move from white, look at what we've done. These pawns are excuse me. These pawns are extremely strong. And notice how they're completely blocking black's two pieces over here. This is often how black drifts into passivity, is that these pieces get corralled by these pawns, and then white has a free rein on the rest of the board. This pawn isn't weak. We can also look how either something like this is going to perfectly defend the pawn. Bishop will go to d3. The bishop is beautiful. We can castle either direction. We could even potentially leave our king in the center, because it's going to be the endgame. There's no real danger to our king. And in this type of position, white tends to do very, very well, even if he doesn't technically have an advantage. Practically speaking, white's play is easier. And that goes a long way, especially in amateur level chess. Another possibility is f6. And then that would technically lead to something like, we'll take, knight takes f6, we'll castle. And in this type of position, again, this is a position where white doesn't have a tangible advantage. Okay, so he's got a slightly better pawn structure. The position is equal. But it's one of those positions where it can be really easy for black to make a mistake. For instance, if you're to do, readjust the castle, that loses a pawn here. That's not very good. If he plays d6 to try and defend that, well, then we get our rooks to the open file really, really fast. And then there's even this c5 idea. If black takes, okay, maybe he can win a pawn. Well, we're going to be able to double our rooks on either one of these. We're going to invade, and those pawns are extremely weak. There's no way he's going to keep all of them. If you push with d5, well, that doesn't work. So if you were to take and play d5, aha, that's better. This gives our knight this beautiful outpost on d4. c6 is going to fall. Black's pawn structure is an absolute mess. Things are great. And so it's really easy for black to make small inaccuracies that then tumble out of control. Whereas it's much harder for white to make a mistake in this type of position. So those are the two main moves in this position as far as I know, or at least it was the last time I looked at the database, which was a long time ago. My computer doesn't suggest anything else. My opponent plays queen e6, which is one of those moves that's really, really good, but just not in this particular position. Let me back up. If we were to look right... No. Where is it? Ah, I know. So if black, instead of doing this idea with bishop a6, were to play knight b6. Usually we get a position like this. And then here, queen e6 is considered one of the main moves, or at least it certainly once was, because the idea, not that, is, frig. Aha! Is we're putting pressure on this pawn, and then often white would do something like queen e4, and then, you know, we've got bishop a6, and we can see one of black's strategies could be to hit this pawn. Critically, is look how the knight is over here on b6 already. And then there's actually a really interesting line that would run something like this. Yes, with d5. And so black's exchange, and now he's got all the pressure on c4. White can't defend it any more than he already has, and black is going to break through over there. And then usually this position is played as a gambit, and so white will move his queen, black can take, and then we just play bishop e2. And then, again, this is such an interesting position, because, okay, the bishop's attacking this, but it's also undefended, and so if you're to take, it just loses a piece. That's not very good. If the bishop were to move, right, well, then the pawn isn't pinned anymore. We could always win it back at any point. And so it creates this interesting balance where white, and also black's pawn structure is a mess. So even if he keeps his pawn, it's not very good. But anyway, there's this really interesting tension in the position. It's like, can black is put all its pressure breaking through on the queen side? He did, but then what does he do next? How does he, you know, keep going? What's happening over here? Like, he can't take. If he starts moving his pieces away, we can just win the pawn right back. And in the meantime, white is going to play bishop e2. We're going to castle. And we could even think about doing some funny stuff over here on the king side. We're going to assume black has to castle on the king side. The center is too wide. Just a great opening, right? Again, types of positions you don't tend to see anywhere else. Sorry. I just gave the move away. So after queen e6, the problem, well, okay, we can see it right away, is that I can just take the knight. Sure, he can take my queen, but then I can take his. He takes, I took the pawn check, and then I took the bishop. And what's happened is I'm simply up a whole knight. Also, his pawn structure is even more terrible. We just back up. So he takes, I take, he took my piece. And so I could have just, you know, taken it right away. Come on. There we go. But then he could take the pawn, probably with the f-pawn, and we can see his pawn structure is better, and it's going to take me a while to actually win this game. Like, it just is. In this position, he played rook a8, then he resigned before I could do anything else. These pawns are so incredibly weak, so I can just double my rooks there, and I'm going to win them. And if I don't win them, that's fine, because I can just ship my rooks over the d-file, invade down this way, I'm going to win something there. And it's a really, really easy game. My opponent actually thought for a long time before playing this move, and then before resigning. So I thought, oh geez, am I going to have to actually take 50 moves to win this endgame? But he resigned, so I guess that was okay. So the game itself isn't that interesting. Again, I played bishop g5. He moved the queen to what is a thematic square, but in this particular position, because the knight is on d5 instead of b6, I could just take it, because I'm hitting his queen, take, and that's game over. Interesting, actually, if you look at this, is that we can see when he played queen e6, I had 16 minutes on the clock, and I was down to the 40, so it took me 2 minutes to see this. And this is actually funny. It took me about, of those 2 minutes, 90 seconds I'm looking at it thinking, queen e6 looks really, really funky. What's wrong with it? And I'm spending time looking at this. I'm spending time looking at this. I was spending time looking at this. Until it suddenly realized, oh wait, that's just a blunder, and I can just take it. Oh dear. Chess is a funny game sometimes. So anyway, yeah, so the game isn't the most interesting, but hopefully my discussion on this opening, which is again my favorite opening, not necessarily the opening I do the best with, But certainly opening I enjoy the most. Even in, because a lot of positions I still don't really understand, but I tend to understand them just a little bit more than my opponents, and that often gives me good results. Though just as often I I lose in some really spectacular ways. But consider this, lesson number 1 and why I really enjoyed this opening. Yeah, so that's that. So thanks for watching. Comments, like, subscribe. That's great. I'll put some analysis on my blog, though. Again, it's a one-move blunder on move 11, so it's hard to say too much more than I already have. But yeah, so check that out, SmithyQ.com. That's it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.